There have been days when Pisces feels a quiet unrest inside. Not exactly sadness, not a clear sense of worry either. Just something subtle, a vague feeling, as if something is slowly, silently approaching. Life on the outside goes on as usual. You keep your routines. You still smile, still work, still listen to others. But somewhere deep within, your intuition keeps whispering that an important message is drawing closer. Not everyone understands this kind of feeling. And the truth is, not everyone wants to know what is about to be revealed. Because when the truth arrives, it doesn't just bring answers. It asks us to look back at ourselves. If you are a Pisces, and lately you've felt as though you're standing at the edge of an invisible doorway, then today's story is meant for you. Because everything begins with a very small sign. That quiet sense that something is about to happen. Lately, Pisces hasn't felt truly at ease inside. Not the kind of unease that keeps you awake at night. Not panic. Not fear. Just something strange. Low. Quiet. Gentle. But persistent. Life on the outside keeps moving as usual. You still go through familiar routines, still talk to the same people, still keep a rhythm that looks perfectly fine to anyone watching. But deep within, something more subtle is shifting, like a calm surface of water with an unseen current flowing steadily beneath. There's no clear sign to name it, no specific event to warn you, yet your intuition refuses to stay silent. It shows up in ordinary moments, when you're sitting alone, when the room light softens, when the noise of the world slowly fades away. A passing thought, a vague sensation, that something is drawing closer. Pisces has always been sensitive to what others overlook. You feel the energy in a room. You notice a shift in someone's eyes. You sense what hasn't been spoken. And this time is no different. This feeling isn't loud. It doesn't rush you. It simply stays. Quiet. Patient. Like a gentle reminder that somewhere a door is preparing to open. Maybe you've tried to brush it aside, telling yourself you're overthinking, convincing yourself that everything will settle back into place. But the more you ignore it, the clearer it becomes. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that asks you to slow down, to listen more closely to yourself. This doesn't feel like pointless anxiety. There's no frantic energy here. It feels more like ripening, like fruit nearing the moment it falls from the branch, like the air before rain, carrying a scent you can't quite explain. You may not know exactly what's coming, but you can sense that timing itself is changing. Pisces has lived through many phases. You've learned how to adapt, how to give, how to yield, how to understand. Yet there comes a moment when even you realize you can't keep living the same way. Not because you're exhausted, but because the person inside you is no longer who you used to be. This feeling often arrives when a deeper layer of truth is preparing to surface. Not a truth meant to hurt, but one that's necessary. A truth that helps you see where you truly stand, how far you've come, and what you genuinely want in the next chapter of your life. What's important is that this feeling doesn't demand action. It doesn't push for immediate decisions. It only asks for honesty. Honesty about what you've been avoiding. Honesty about questions you haven't dared to answer. Honesty about emotions you've kept carefully hidden. Behind a gentle exterior, not everyone experiences this at the same time, and not everyone is ready to listen when it arrives. But for Pisces, this is often a sign that something within is waking up. A deeper part of you is knocking, asking you to pause, to look back, and to feel more clearly. If you're in this place right now, allow yourself not to understand everything immediately. There's no need to rush for answers. Just stay with the feeling for a moment. Listen to it, the way you'd listen to an old song late at night, not to analyze, only to feel, because every transformation begins with something very small. And for Pisces, it almost always begins with that quiet sense that something is about to happen. There are messages that don't arrive when we're still rushing. They don't come when life feels loud, crowded, or full of hope. They tend to appear after we've walked far enough to realize we can't keep pretending we don't see anymore. For Pisces, the message approaching now carries that exact feeling. It isn't meant for everyone, and it isn't something everyone would want to hold close, because it doesn't come to soothe, it doesn't come to comfort, and it doesn't come to promise that everything will be fine the old way. This message shows up after you've lived through enough cycles, moments of understanding others more than yourself, moments of wondering if you're asking for too much, long stretches of silence just to keep the outside world calm. Maybe you once believed that if you waited a little longer, if you stayed patient just a bit more, things would eventually shift. But deep down, you also sensed you had reached the edge of what you could carry, not because you were weak, but because you had grown enough to understand that avoidance is no longer a healthy choice. This message doesn't choose its timing by accident. It arrives when you begin questioning the value of what you're holding on to, when you realize that constant giving without mutual understanding slowly turns into quiet exhaustion, and when you no longer want to live just to meet someone else's expectations. What's unique about this message is that it doesn't take a clear form right away. It might come through a brief conversation, a sentence spoken casually, a moment that makes you go still because something inside you has just shifted. This isn't the kind of news that makes you laugh or sigh with relief. It's more like a light being switched on in a dark room, not immediately comfortable, but suddenly everything becomes visible. You see where you stand. You see what no longer fits. And you see what you've been avoiding for a long time. Pisces often carries a tender heart. You want to believe in goodness. You want to preserve connections. You want things to unfold as gently as possible. But this message doesn't ask whether you're ready. It appears only when you've gathered enough experience to understand that truth, even when it isn't pleasant, still deserves to be acknowledged. Perhaps what makes this message powerful is its timing. It arrives when you're no longer seeking validation from the outside as much, when your inner voice becomes easier to hear, when you no longer feel the need to explain your emotions so often. This awakening message isn't powerful because it's dramatic. It's powerful because it touches the place where you've been silent for too long. It doesn't tell you to change right away. It doesn't push you toward immediate decisions. It simply places a question in front of you and leaves you alone with it. And maybe its greatest value is that it honors your journey. It doesn't dismiss what you've been through. It doesn't overlook your quiet efforts. It gently reminds you that you've come far enough to no longer live in uncertainty. For Pisces, this isn't an ending. It's the moment. You begin to see everything through a different lens, clearer, more honest, and closer to who you truly are. There is something deeply human about this. We are not always ready to face the truth. Not because truth is always cruel, but because sometimes it touches beliefs we've held on to for a very long time. Beliefs that once helped us stand. Beliefs that once gave us hope during the darkest chapters of our lives. For Pisces, belief is not just a thought. It is emotion. It is memory. It is the stories you've quietly told yourself to keep moving forward. The belief that if you stay patient long enough, things will change. That if you remain compassionate, others will eventually understand. That if you keep waiting, everything will one day fall into place. Those beliefs were not wrong. They mattered. They carried you through moments that were genuinely hard. But people do not remain still. You change. Your experiences change. Your perspective shifts. And sometimes, what was once true in an earlier season no longer fits the person you are becoming now. The truth Pisces is approaching may feel exactly like that. Not loud, not accusatory, but clear enough to make you pause. It may shake an old hope, not to deny what you once believed, but to remind you that you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed that belief to survive. Not everyone wants to know the truth, because knowing it often means letting go. Letting go of familiar images. Letting go of old explanations. Letting go of comforting answers. We used to avoid more difficult questions. Pisces tends to hold on to what feels familiar, even when it no longer brings peace. Not because you are weak, but because your capacity for empathy runs deep. You see the pain behind other people's actions. You understand why things unfolded the way they did. And sometimes, that very understanding makes it harder for you to release than it is for others. But truth does not arrive to accuse. It does not say you were wrong. It simply places a gentle question in front of you, asking whether you are still holding on to something because it feels familiar or because it continues to nourish you. Not everyone is ready to answer that question, because answering it requires a great deal of honesty with oneself. It asks us to admit that some illusions once helped us endure, but now are keeping us rooted in a place we have already outgrown. Illusion is not always negative. Sometimes it is how the soul protects itself. But as we mature, as we become steadier inside, those illusions may need to be replaced with clarity, not to hurt ourselves, but to free energy for what truly aligns. The truth Pisces touches in this phase may bring a sense of loss at first. The loss of a hope, the loss of a beautiful image. Yet, alongside that, another feeling often emerges. The feeling of breathing more easily. The relief of no longer forcing yourself to believe in something that no longer fits. Not everyone wants to experience this shift. Many choose to stay with what feels familiar, even when something inside feels unsettled. That choice is not wrong. Everyone moves at their own pace, in their own time, on their own path. For Pisces, having the courage to face the truth is not a loud act of bravery. It is a very quiet kind of courage. The courage to see more clearly, even when what you see does not match what you once hoped for. And perhaps that is why this truth is not meant for everyone. It comes only to those who are ready to step beyond old stories and begin writing a new one, with a voice that is more honest, more gentle, and closer to who they truly are. Once the truth begins to take shape, whether faint or clear, Pisces rarely reacts right away. There are no rushed decisions, no impulsive moves, just an extended pause, a quiet stretch of time where you're gently pulled back to face yourself more deeply than ever before. This moment doesn't feel like a confrontation. It feels more like standing in front of a mirror, inside a silent room with no one else around, to explain yourself to justify your feelings, or to keep comfortable. There is only you and the emotions that are truly present. The feelings you may have set aside before, simply because you were too focused on caring about how others felt. At this point, blame no longer seems to matter. Blaming circumstances doesn't make you feel lighter. Blaming others doesn't help you understand yourself. Even comforting yourself with familiar phrases no longer works the way it used to. Because deep down, you're standing at a very subtle, yet very real crossroads. Pisces often soothes itself through compassion, You tell yourself that everything will be okay, that everyone has their reasons, that you can endure a little longer. But in this moment of self-reflection, those words don't sound as convincing anymore. Not because you've grown cold, but because you're beginning to listen to a different voice, the voice of honesty. True emotions are not always comfortable. They might appear as mild disappointment, as a sadness you can't quite name, or simply as a hollow feeling when you realize you've been giving for far too long to something that no longer responds. These emotions don't arrive to weaken you. They come only to be acknowledged. Facing yourself rarely looks like a clear answer. It feels more like a question, placed gently in front of you, then left there. A question that doesn't rush you, that doesn't demand an immediate response, yet also doesn't allow you to keep looking away. Will I continue living the old way or step into a new truth? This question isn't about right or wrong. It's about choosing between what feels familiar and what feels honest, between safety and clarity, between continuing to play the role of someone easy for everyone else or beginning to be more truthful with yourself. Pisces may hesitate here, not because change is frightening, but because you understand that every choice carries consequences. Staying the same may keep the outside world calmer, but stepping into a new truth asks you to accept movement from within. What matters is that this moment does not ask you to act immediately. It simply invites you to stay with yourself a little longer, to notice what feels light, what feels heavy, what feels real, and what feels like you're only maintaining a familiar image. Facing yourself does not mean rejecting the past. It doesn't erase the effort you once gave. It simply means acknowledging that you've changed and that this is natural, that you no longer have to carry what no longer belongs to you just because it feels familiar. This moment may be very quiet, yet incredibly powerful. There are no loud sounds, no dramatic signals, only a subtle shift in how you see yourself, in how you listen to your emotions, in how you allow yourself the right to choose again. And perhaps this is the moment when Pisces begins to enter a different chapter, not through action, but through clarity, not through declarations, but through a quiet decision, the decision to live closer to your truth, one gentle step at a time. After the moment of facing yourself, there is usually no signal, no bell ringing, no clear marker to say that something has officially ended. Only a very subtle feeling, quiet and refined, that something inside is slowly being released. Like the end of a long day, when you realize you no longer need to hold on to the old light. This cycle closes in its own way, without drama, without long explanations. It feels like the moment you stop waiting for something that once occupied so much space in your mind. You stop hoping that someone else will change. You stop wishing that a certain situation will return to how it used to be. And sometimes you stop trying to be the version of yourself that once left you exhausted. Pisces rarely ends things by slamming doors. You let go quietly, by withdrawing energy from places that no longer nourish you, by no longer asking why things didn't turn out as expected, not because you stopped caring, but because you understood that some things no longer need an explanation. This cycle may involve a relationship, not necessarily a separation or a clean break. Sometimes it's simply that you no longer place that person at the center of your inner world. You stop revolving your emotions around their reactions. You stop waiting for a signal to give yourself permission to feel at peace. It may also be the closing of a long-held expectation, the expectation that things would naturally improve if you stayed patient enough, that your silence would be understood, that what you never said out loud would somehow still be felt. As that expectation slowly dissolves, the pain is not as sharp as you once imagined. There is only a small emptiness at first, and then a sense of relief. And sometimes, what truly ends is an old version of yourself, the version that tried to please everyone, the version that feared disappointing others, the version that believed you had to sacrifice endlessly to be worthy of love. That version once helped you survive, but at a certain point, it no longer fits the person you are becoming. This ending does not need to be announced. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. You don't need to prove that you've changed. You don't need to convince others to understand. The shift happens quietly, yet decisively, because it comes from inner clarity, not from external reaction. There may be moments when you look back and wonder if you've become too distant, but then you realize that letting go does not mean losing compassion. You can still care without trading away your peace to keep everything exactly the same. The cycle does not end to erase beautiful memories. It simply places them where they belong. They no longer control the present. They no longer shape your choices. They no longer keep you trapped in familiar loops. What remains is appreciation without attachment. Pisces often notices this change in the smallest details. You respond differently to situations that once felt familiar. You explain less. You stop trying to fix everything. You no longer feel responsible for carrying everyone else's emotions. What closes quietly rarely leaves behind a large void. Instead, it opens a new space, a space calm enough for you to hear yourself, wide enough for deeper breaths, and honest enough that you no longer need to live by outdated expectations. And when that cycle comes to an end, you don't need to do anything else. There is no rush to begin something new. Simply allow yourself to remain in that stillness for a little while, because in that quiet space, Pisces is gently stepping out of a chapter that has already completed its purpose. As everything slowly settles, as the intense emotions no longer rise the way they once did, Pisces begins to notice something different. This message was never meant to take anything important away from you. It carries no punishment. It carries no loss in a negative sense. It simply returns something you may have dropped somewhere along a long stretch of your journey. Clarity. Clarity doesn't mean that every question now has an answer. It isn't a detailed map of the future. Clarity is much simpler than that. It's the sense of knowing where you stand in your own life, knowing what drains you, knowing what no longer fits, and knowing that you no longer have to keep convincing yourself to stay in places where the energy has already run out. When the truth is accepted, Pisces rarely feels a sudden rush of joy or relief. Instead, there's a feeling of lightness, like setting down a backpack you've been carrying for far too long without realizing how heavy it had become. Your shoulders still remember the weight, but your breath grows deeper, your heartbeat slows, and you're no longer forcing yourself to keep everything balanced. The clarity this message brings is not coldness. It doesn't make you closed off or distant. It simply allows you to see things through a different lens. Less illusion, less self-blame, and far more honesty with your own emotions. You begin to recognize what comes from genuine care and what comes from habitual sacrifice. Moving in the right direction, doesn't mean the road ahead will be easier. It only means you're no longer walking against yourself. You stop convincing yourself you're fine. When something inside is exhausted, you stop maintaining roles that cause you to forget what it feels like to be yourself. This message doesn't ask you to change overnight. It doesn't pressure you into making major decisions. It places a very subtle gift in your hands, the ability to see more clearly, and the right to choose again if needed, to choose how you love, to choose where your energy goes, to choose how you show up in your own life. Not everyone is willing to receive this kind of shift, because clarity always comes with responsibility. Responsibility for your emotions, responsibility for the choices ahead, and responsibility for no longer turning away from what you've already seen. But for Pisces, once you've touched the truth, turning back often feels harder than moving forward. What's most beautiful about this message is that it doesn't break you. It doesn't erase your gentleness. It doesn't take away your compassion. It simply helps you place that gentleness where it truly belongs, toward others and toward yourself, in a way that feels more balanced, more sustainable. And when this journey comes to a close, Pisces doesn't need to do anything dramatic. No announcements, no explanations, no proof. Just a slower pace, a deeper listening, and a quiet trust that the clarity you've received is not an ending, but the foundation for a more truthful way of living. If you've stayed with this story until now, you may be standing at a very personal threshold of your own. There's no need to rush through it. Just know that you are not alone in this feeling. Everyone reaches a moment when they must pause, look deeper, and choose to live in alignment with their own truth. And sometimes that is the greatest gift a message can bring. Not what you wanted, but what you needed at exactly the right time.